On this episode of Culture Crossroads, well, it happened. Election day is here and gone, and many of us are celebrating a President-elect Trump and a Trump administration, as well as many Senate and House races and ballot initiatives across the country. We're going to take stock at where we are right now, take a little bit of time to enjoy the win, because we should. We need to enjoy the win, and then we're going to get right back to work, because there is work to do. And how about this? The Democrats are already crying racism and sexism, and that's why Harris lost. You knew it would happen, but are they building for something else? And then later in the program, gender ideology. Is this the new doorway? Is this the new cultural contagion that the church needs to get on board and fight? All that is coming up on Culture Crossroads, straight ahead. Again, friends, and welcome to another episode of Culture Crossroads. I'm Andrew Southwick. He is R.C. Williams of We Are the Watchmen and Sherlock Market Research, I should say. Juliana is being the CEO. She's okay, but she's doing some important supervisory work. Make sure that R.C. and I keep it in, because we're just coming back from doing the all-nighter election a few nights ago. Anyway, RC, good to see you today. Good to see you're alive and well, walking around. How about it?
Yeah, brother. Great to see you too. Election night was something else. We were talking to some friends this week, and they were talking about, did you have this scenario on your war board? And actually on the Sherlock Research war board, we had the scenario where Kamala Harris takes a dive, right? She is set up to actually lose. We also had the potential for a Reagan-Carter type of blowout. Now, while we didn't quite get there, it did bear out that Trump won and kind of pierced through that blue wall. He got Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. So we had that on our board as well. Andrew, I think the big takeaway for me in feeling better and being able to take a breath here, and we're going to discuss that in the show today about what we do going forward. It was nice to have things done in a decent amount of time. We were being prepared, I guess, or a psyop was being ran on us that it was going to take days to get to a winner and weeks to get an answer, and this could potentially happen, this could potentially happen. So just get ready for nothing to be decided. It was nice to see things get decided. And, you and I went on a county by county thing in these key battleground states, in particular, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. And Georgia. It was really good to see that the places that caused the biggest issues in 2020 were actually pacing on their counts at a pretty good clip, which is why they were able to call those states. So refreshing is what I would say, Andrew.
Yeah, I mentioned it on our live stream broadcast, but one of the things I was encouraged about is exactly that the election went as it was supposed to. For the most part, counts stayed on time. We got the election that night, or early in the morning, as it pertains to be. But it wasn't a long, protracted, drawn out thing. The only thing that was drawn out was the fact that as soon as Kamala Harris knew that she lost, which was earlier in the evening, by the way, she had her staffers come out and say, well, she's not going to come out and talk, which, there's the part of me that, wants to tap dance and make fun, because that's an own the libs moment. She was so petty. She took her ball and went home. She didn't even have the decency to go tell her supporters, hey, this doesn't look good. We're going to go home. She just left them there, and they all went away. She abandoned them. But I didn't feel bad about that. And of course, we weren't abandoning anything on that night. But it shows you, though, too, that kind of character trait. I really do think that we were given a reprieve from what would have been a horrible Harris administration. And I am glad that our election system functioned as it was supposed to. And I'm not just saying that because we won. If this election had come out and Harris had won, but the votes were counted in the same way, I would say the same thing about this election system. I would be extremely concerned about where we're going, and I still am.
Right.
But right now we have some time to get some other things right. Some of our infrastructures back on course in America. I wonder, did any results surprise you at all? I was surprised by Michigan. We talked about that a lot on the live stream. I did not believe for a second that Trump was going to win Michigan, and he did. Were there any surprises like that to you in terms of some of the states that he won, or maybe some other races or measures?
Yeah, Andrew, if I could just put on the record for posterity, if you wanted to sum up Kamala Harris's professional and political life in 4.5 minutes, it was what happened on election night when she sent out her co-campaign chair to go out and talk to the people versus her. You know, we've said on this show many times, people have no idea what they're getting in Kamala Harris. Now they can see for themselves. We sum up her entire life in 4.5 minutes of her not showing up to speak to people who went out of their way to see her and spend time with her to tell them the truth. So setting that aside, races that surprised me. In Ohio, we had Bernie Moreno winning that Senate race. I was pleasantly surprised by how much he won that Senate race. You know, Sherrod Brown had kind of dug himself in like a tick in the Senate and had put off other competitors, but Bernie Moreno, to his credit, took it to him. And we were watching that race. They wouldn't call it for the longest time. And then they finally did. I also thought that the Senate race in Pennsylvania, being as close as it was a pleasant surprise. But then Pennsylvania as a state was also a surprise. Those stick with me. I agree with you on Michigan. And so one of the things we were watching in Michigan and Pennsylvania in particular, and what I think is good for our audience here on the show to understand, is that when you looked at those states, instead of thinking of them as a monolith, you have to look very carefully at the counties. Now, on the live stream, we gave people a bunch of education. People now know that Detroit sits smack dab in the middle of Wayne County, Michigan, much like they understand in Wisconsin that Milwaukee sits in Milwaukee County and Philadelphia in Pennsylvania sits in Philadelphia County. Really, many of your elections come down to those major metropolitan areas. And so when the counting was slow, especially in Wayne County, Andrew, you and I were both concerned. We're like, well, the state is here, right? Because there were so many outstanding votes and there's a ton of people that live in the Detroit metro. This is probably going to go for Kamala Harris. Now, it didn't. But to see the pace and the clip of the vote counting in those counties, same thing with Georgia. We noticed that Fulton County, which is where Atlanta proper sits, and then those surrounding counties, Cobb, Gwinnett, DeKalb, were all counting at a pretty good clip. I will say I was pleasantly surprised by that. And I think a big part of why that happened is there were so many eyes watching the process, which is another pleasant surprise. You know, we've made the analogy with what happened with Glenn Youngkin in the state of Virginia in 2021. In 2018, conservative poll watching was about 4%. In 2021, it was closer to 96%. Now, they fully planned to cheat in Youngkin's election, but there were so many eyes watching that they couldn't get away with it. So they had to let the natural course run. That's what election night 2024 felt like, Andrew, and that was a pleasant surprise overall.
Yeah, when I got home, my wife was concerned because like last time, she didn't believe me that Trump had won. And I said, but we even said it on the air. I'm not sure. Maybe we were the first. We might have been the first show to say President-elect Trump on air.
Yep.
And because it wasn't yet official, though we had seen the states that were being called, and we said there's no mathematical path for Kamala Harris. And so we were like, President-elect Trump, okay, good night, you know. But my wife said, no, last time we went to bed and we woke up and they found votes. But this time there were so many eyes on it. And there's a couple of thanks that I think deserve thanks. One is Elon Musk for buying Twitter. Now, as suspicious as some people might be of him for certain things, or Neuralink or whatever it is, one, if we didn't have Twitter as a free speech platform, imagine how much we would not know about Kamala Harris today. Two, if we didn't have it as the platform that it is, imagine how many eyes would not have been on last night's races to see what was happening in real time. It made it impossible. It took the margin of cheating away from the Democrats. And not only that, but Trump winning the popular vote and the Electoral College and by a good margin also took that margin away. And so thanks to Elon Musk for that. The other thanks is that as a state, some of our viewers are in South Dakota. South Dakota, our friends there, thank you so much. You guys, your state was the most consistent, even more than my state of Florida. I will admit it, but you guys made America better because you voted down all the bad stuff. You voted for the good stuff, and not only rejecting things like RL-21, the land grab, and not just going, presidential and all these kinds of things, but also decidedly rejecting abortion, refusing to enshrine abortion in your state constitution. Thank you for standing strong, South Dakota. That is going to matter, and I believe that's something even God will honor, because even in Florida, we'll talk about it in just a second, but the abortion measure in Florida, Amendment 4, did get voted down by the slimmest of margins. And that tells you a lot about where the conservatism is in a state like Florida compared to the conservatism in South Dakota. Now, I'm glad we are both conservative states, but again, thank you, South Dakota, for that. And so as I was driving into the studio today, I had let's see, what did Bob Hoskins say in Hook? I had an apostrophe, an epiphany, right? And because we mentioned it on our live stream that, and it's been said before, and we win the presidential election, and this is especially true of Republicans, GOP, conservatives. We win the election, and then we kind of wash our hands and walk away and say, we did it, but we know that we can't do that this time. Not only has the GOP moved to the left considerably, and I think that's a part of the reason why Trump won back the Rust Belt states to the degree that he did, was because it's not the same Republican Party that it was. And it probably won't be again. And we're going to have conversations about that on future episodes, certainly. But if this were a game of football, we've just come through, at least, a few possessions where we got scored on all the time. The 2022 midterms, they completely scored on us. 2020 election, they scored on us and pulled off trick plays and hide the ball tricks and everything else. This election, as I see it, is an interception. It's not a touchdown. We intercepted the ball, because I also think that even in progressive delusion, hey, we're gonna win this and it's gonna be no problem. But we intercepted the ball here. So the thing is, we didn't really intercept it with 2 seconds left to go before halftime. And it's not a 2-minute warning. It's not the quarter break. We have to go back and get back on the field. I wanted to spend a few minutes and take a breath and enjoy and have some fun and enjoy the win. And we should, but we have to get back on the field, and we have to do it quickly, because there are midterms coming back up. And when I say midterms, I don't mean election seasons and campaigns. I mean ballot initiatives. I mean referendums, budgets, taxes, all kinds of things, institutional things in our counties and communities that we need to be aware of if we're going to bring this country back. If we're on offense and we can't stall out like we've had before, what do you think offense looks like for us now, especially given the fact that the Republican Party and the GOP is now effectively what the Democrats were in the 80s and probably isn't coming back anytime soon?
Great question, Andrew. I love you bring up the football analogy. We are both football fans. We both root for West Coast teams, although mine is better than yours. I'll just put that out there now as a 49er fan. But, it hurts because it's true. Yeah, well, nobody's perfect, brother. It's okay. So, but the analogy of an interception. So for those who aren't football fans, simply put, that's a turnover in football, right? The offense throws an interception to the defense, which means theoretically the defensive team is going to take over. But a couple of things can happen there. If you intercept the ball and you attempt to run it back for a touchdown, right? Instead of getting down and letting your offense come in and do the work that they've been paid to do, you can have the ball stripped from you. You can fumble it and give it back to the other team. You can do what seems to be popular now in football as a sport, and that's get to the goal line and drop the football in celebration before you actually cross it and score a touchdown. These are things that we have to be conscious of. So, Andrew, what does it look like when we're back on offense? I think what you brought up about the GOP kind of washing their hands of it and everybody saying, okay, all done, let's board up here and we'll be back in 2 years, is what's going to get us right back into trouble. That is almost running with the football loosely and somebody stripping it from you on the other team or dropping it before you score a touchdown. We have to be methodical in everything that's coming next. And, we had a call this week with our friends at the American States Rights Forum, which we're a founding member of, with Sherlock and Watchman Action. And we talked about how, you mentioned Elon Musk earlier, if Elon Musk is going to be brought in to clean up government and to reduce waste, then a lot of the functions that the feds have been doing outside of their jurisdiction are going to fall to state and local municipalities. We, the people in a self-governing society, need to be ready and excited. Is it going to be a lot of work? Yes, but we need to be excited because for the first time in probably your entire life, you're going to have a real opportunity for governance in a meaningful way and to have some level of control over the fiscal outcomes that happen to you should this happen as it looks like it is now. So, Andrew, I think being methodical and focused at a local level and making sure that you are engaged with everything that is going on that's going to impact you, and then rallying others to do the same, is going to ensure that not only do we intercept the ball and get down, but we let the offense come back on the field and march down and score.
That's a great point, because the other piece on that is RFK Jr. And he's already mentioned how there are entire departments of the FDA that need to go. I think it's the entire FDA and a whole bunch of other alphabet soup, but that's beside the point. Nonetheless, you're right. Those things are going to fall back to the states. What we don't want to have happen is when abortion fell back to the states, for the most part, we enshrined it in all our constitutions. It looks like that's going to continue over the next couple of cycles. These other things, we don't want them to be co-opted by the progressives. We have an opportunity now, if we're ready, to catch those things and make bastions of freedom in state after state across this land. We are going to leave that conversation there. When we come back, RC is going to stick around. We're going to talk about how the Democrats, though, are trying to get back on offense, and they're using a defensive playbook to do it. We're going to break that down. And also, we're going to talk about one of the most concerning aspects of last night's election, seen in some of the results across the country. You don't want to miss that. Stick around. Culture Crossroads. Be right back.
I am an 8-time world champion, 15-time national champion, and current American record holder in the 3,000 meter indoor. With Stewart's, it has been so amazing because it's an anti-inflammatory, it increases blood flow, and Stewart's is all natural. It doesn't have any stickiness, it doesn't have any smell, and I can use it at any time. It's simple, it just works.
Order today at stewartsnatural.health. Use code April10 for a discount. stewartsnatural.health.
Stop out to our facility, Highway 22 South. Let us build a truck for you.
And welcome back to Culture Crossroads. We're here with R.C. Williams, breaking down some post-election numbers and results from races, and also just taking some time to enjoy the win as well. Well, it's not a surprise at all that the progressives, the Democrats, RC, they were right back to work this morning on the Morning Joe, which Mark Levin affectionately calls the Morning Schmo. He's not wrong. Joe Scarborough, Mika Brzezinski, Al Sharpton, our world-famous race baiter and grifter, was back on to tell us why we are all racist and misogynist. And it's not just white people. Now it's black people and Latin people, too. This is really what they're starting to do now. We are all racist and misogynist, and no matter what color we are, because we didn't vote for Her Majesty Kamala. Take a listen for yourself, and we'll break this down.
We cannot ignore there is still a lot of racism and gender bias in this country. And I think for us to ignore that and not try to bring that front and center so we can heal that would mean that we would end up in the same place. Kamala Harris is a woman of color in an interracial marriage and running as a woman to be the head of state. That is something a lot of Americans are not ready to deal with. How we move that forward, we need to face it and deal with it. And I hope we do it in a way that shows that we will be more mature than when they lost.
Well, I just say, Rev, really quickly, too. Democrats need to be mature, and they need to be honest. And they need to say, yes, there's misogyny. But it's not just misogyny from white men. It's misogyny from Hispanic men.
Right.
It's misogyny from black men, things we've all been talking about, who do not want a woman leading them. Might be race issues with Hispanics. They don't want a black woman as president of the United States. You know, a lot of Hispanic voters have problems with black candidates.
Right.
A lot
and
of,
with other Hispanics. You got some that don't like each other. And some of the most misogynist things I've heard going on this Get Out the Vote tour came from black men.
So, okay, let me get this straight. White people, they're always racist. But now Latinos are racist and black people are racist. And was I hearing things correctly when Joe Scarborough, in his infinite wisdom, came out and said Democrats, they always balkanize and group people? That's true. But he said that right after he balkanized and grouped people, because he just said white people are racist and Latinos are racist and black people are racist, apparently as he was doing the hand jive or something like that. But it can't possibly be that their policies are terrible and America is suffering because these people rule with an iron fist and only care about raw power. They do not care about freedom. In fact, freedom stands in their way. And that is something that we soundly reject as an American people, at least for now.
There's a grift shift happening now, Andrew. And you know, Big Al Sharpton is right in the center of that. Let's break down what he said. He said basically, hey, look, it's not enough for white people to be racist anymore. All of these people are racist. And it's like Al Sharpton had some revelation that the Hispanic diaspora is diverse. Cubans, Puerto Ricans, right? Like this is some magic revelation. Just like black people are diverse. You've got black Americans, you've got black people who have immigrated from here, you've got them from the Caribbean, everything. What a shock, right? The thing that stuck with me, and I'll get to Joe in a second, with what Al said, is he said that a woman of color who is in an interracial marriage is running for head of state. And there are some people who aren't ready for that. Well, based on Al's history, that would include him too. And that comes from someone who is of mixed race, who is in an interracial marriage. Let's just be honest, right? He's full of it. Joe Scarborough, not too far behind. For him to have the nerve, and this is something that Democrats seem to do exceedingly well. When they are done, they are very studious about throwing out their garbage. Right? When they are done with something, they throw it out. They're doing it now with black people and Hispanics and so on and so forth because they're no longer useful, because they actually express themselves in a country where that is not only encouraged, but you are duty bound, if you actually look closely, to do so. It is amazing to me, but in a way it isn't, that Joe Scarborough has the nerve to actually go on national television and make a statement like that. But Andrew, it's a reminder from our last segment to not intercept the ball, try to run it back for a touchdown, and then have it stripped from you by some idiot like Joe Scarborough.
It's amazing how these things actually work, because this is the Democrat Party and the Democrats' mouthpiece in the media. Well, most of them, certainly this one, MSNBC, but they're calling their own people racist and misogynist at this point. They're accusing them of not turning out. I think one of the things that we're surprised, Donald Trump did have a huge showing of support from Latino voters, and that busts up one of their replacement narratives that let's open the borders so that we can get in all these voters. And you know that's something that they wanted to do, but it blew up in their face, because just like people who paid their student loans off, on the right way, don't want to see a bunch of people all of a sudden just get their debts for free. Well, the immigrants who have come to this country and did it the right way and are legal don't want to see, especially the amount of criminals and nefarious creatures that come across, and all of a sudden they're just getting everything in a bag of chips too. So yeah, they're going to go with someone who's strong on immigration, because those are the people who come here legally are the ones who are coming here to make a better life. The people who are coming here illegally are the ones who are coming here because they know they won't get in trouble. was Sharpton? My goodness. Sharpton said something else. Voters that didn't go to the polls. Now, this actually moves us to a little different conversation. Pastor Mark Driscoll, pastor of Trinity Church in Arizona, posted on X that we had record low evangelical turnout at the polls this time. And what was interesting is the GOP won the popular vote for the first time since 2004. That was Bush v. Kerry. So we had less evangelicals, and I want to know why. And I have a theory. You tell me if this is getting close. And this theory, I'm sorry, is not great. But I think it's some of the concerns that we've had on this show. Now, we're going to get into this as more data comes out in future episodes. But right now, my hypothesis, what I'm wondering about is this. Did the GOP go so far left that they have now alienated a fair section of evangelical voters? I know that in some of the circles and the connections that I'm in, there were many, I realize it's anecdotal, but many, many Christians who said, I'm done voting for this. One of their chief reasons was abortion. That Trump effectively embraced abortion now, and we can negotiate when to kill them. Now, I mentioned in the previous segment how abortion was on the ballot in 10 states. In 7 out of 10 of those states, abortion was enshrined into the Constitution. Florida rejected it, but narrowly. We have a 60% majority for an amendment. I think it was 57%, so it didn't meet the threshold, but that doesn't mean they're not going to try again. South Dakota was really the only state that defeated it soundly and, to the point where they should just not try anymore. But the rest of the states embraced it. We have lost the issue of abortion politically. We lost. We didn't speak. We were silent on that. And when I say we, I mean the church, because life is a God issue, not a political issue. We were silent on that because we believed them when they said that we were going to offend them and we were going to be racist and misogynist and all kinds of other stuff if we make people have babies, which we are not. But that goes all the way back to a pattern in the church. We can, and just in the modern times, gay marriage, the church shut its mouth about that. Abortion, the church shut its mouth about that. Marijuana, the church has shut its mouth about that, even though now we have all kinds of evidence about the health issues, the brain issues, and what happens to the states politically when marijuana is let in, because they use that as a door to gain more raw power. And as we're going to talk about in the next segment, with my guest in the next segment, the trans agenda now is the new social contagion fight. And I hope we're not silent about that. But this has to change our outreach strategy politically as well as spiritually. And I'm concerned that, yes, we got conservative victories, but it's not the same conservatism that it was. And it did not carry with it the same evangelicals, albeit Trump still managed to get at least 81% of the quote unquote evangelical vote. But it was the lowest evangelical turnout. And I wonder why. RC, am I sniffing around the right clues, or do you see something else in this?
No, you're sniffing around the right clues, Andrew. The party has changed, which is why on this show, we've talked about what happens after November 5th. And here we are. We're of the belief that those things are going to happen. You are going to see alternatives start to pop up because people are so fed up. The evangelical vote as a bloc is fed up with voting for these things. But let me take another stab at it, especially around abortion. I think that that serves as a stark reminder that we are under judgment. You talked about this in your monologue in last week's show, and how we choose to move forward says a lot about how that's ultimately going to end up. So you didn't go and you didn't vote for Trump. Well, what else didn't you vote for? You talked about the state of Florida. Thankfully, thank God that we have a 60% threshold. But let's talk about what happened. It didn't pass, but it came so close. 57% of the voters said that that's what they wanted. That is a moral, spiritual, and biblical failure in the state. Nothing against the people that worked on it. We were part of the Do No Harm Coalition in the state of Florida. Yet and still, this is a moral and biblical failure of the ecclesia to act. And we're going to have to deal with that. And for all the other states, you look what happens when when we as believers abdicate our role in leadership, 7 states just breeze through and enshrine abortion, murder into their constitution. We have to do a serious assessment, Andrew, and look at what being a part of the GOP means and what believers actively need to do as a bloc to ensure that we're morally and biblically doing what we've been told to do.
And we do need representation in leadership. It's true. Well, it is preferable to have representation in leadership. Throughout history, Christians have not always had representation in leadership. So I don't want to say need, because obviously we can thrive with or without, but it is much more difficult. And that I don't want to be in that kind of environment. I don't want my kids to be in that kind of environment. So I'm hoping we can preserve some kind of representation in our leadership. But it doesn't seem like, because as we talked about last week, it seems like the GOP and Trump said, you know what, abortion's a loser politically. We're going to embrace abortion. We're going to move the GOP to the left. We're going to gain a whole bunch of voters that have been left behind by the progressives, and that's true too. But now there are many people of faith and many conservatives left behind, and I think that showed up both in some of the ballot measures, and I think we're going to see that increasingly as the exit polls come back and as the demographics and the numbers come in. We're going to see that bared out in those numbers as well as in terms of who voted. And we can't let that pass us by. And the question is then, as you said, how do we go forward and what do we do? I'll give you the last word.
Andrew, let me make a sad correlation quickly. I talked a minute ago about Al Sharpton and Joe Scarborough and how they are very efficient at throwing away things they no longer need. The GOP went behind closed doors and changed the RNC stance on abortion. And when asked why they did it and why they would go against evangelicals or the ecclesia, they said, well, where else are they going to go? Are you willing to be treated that way? And if so, for how long before you do something about it? That is the question that people should ponder as they watch the show tonight and they continue into the next week.
Because if we don't, if we continue to put up and shut up, we will be the doormats for whatever conservatism becomes in America. And you got to hear it's right here. I'm still glad that Trump won. I'm still glad that Republicans took back the Senate. I'm glad for those things because it still gives us a preferable environment. In fact, when Trump when he was going out to deliver his victory speech, there's footage of this. I don't have it here. But people broke out in the hymn of How Great Thou Art. Now, I'm really hoping that was worshipful, thanking God for the election and not how great Donald Trump art. I don't think so. Maybe for some people, but so at least Trump is not hostile to faith in that way, people of faith. And Trump has shown that he can be persuaded if your voice is strong enough and powerful enough and one whose influence needs to be felt. And I think that's what we need to figure out how to do that now, because our influence is not going to be felt through, we need to overturn Roe v. Wade. That's done. We still have to work to save the lives of the unborn, but that's going to look like a completely different fight now. What does it look like for people of faith to have the kind of influence we used to have in our respective leadership, whether it's state or local? That's going to be the question. And we're going to dig into that. I think the main thing is we cannot be silent. And that might even be a theme of a show for this next year. We're not going to be silent about these issues. We're not going to be silent about the social contagions. We're not going to be silent when if the Trump administration does things that we think are detrimental to the country. We're going to let you know. We're also not going to be silent when good things happen. But here's the thing. We're not going to be silent. And we're not going to be silent about encouraging the church and encouraging our pastors in every pulpit across this land to no longer be silent about these issues that their people so desperately need to know how to apply biblical principles and truth to. All right. We're going to leave that there. When we come back, we are going to actually move the conversation to another social contagion, the trans agenda. We have a mother whose daughter was effectively, socially, sexually, emotionally kidnapped by her school. The daughter's okay now. And what is the mother doing about it? What is the mother doing to fight back? And how can you be a part of that? All that is next. It's an extended faith focus on Culture Crossroads coming up next.
That trampoline in your backyard, an insurance blind spot. Who knew this could be more risk for you? Allstate agents. They can help find your blind spots while watching out for your wallet.
Contact Ebby Burkhardt in Minot to review your blind spots today.
Are you dealing with arthritis, nerve and back pain, dry skin, or superficial wounds, but found no relief? Give Stewart's Natural Health a try. For over 4 decades, Stewart's Natural Health has been helping people and animals with herbal and natural oil lotions, ointments, and creams with a mission to help you relieve pain and feel your best using the power of nature. Discover the safe, drug-free solution to your pain, guaranteed or your money back. Visit stewartsnatural.health today.
And welcome back one more time to Culture Crossroads. It is our faith-focused segment tonight. Of all the good things that happened on election night, and certainly many of us felt some relief that many in our country at least knew that we were heading in the exact wrong direction and needed to turn that around. Underneath the presidential ticket, underneath some of the Senate battles that we saw in the battleground states and around the country, we saw, for example, abortion on the ballot in many states. Now, 7 out of 10 states voted to enshrine abortion in their state constitutions. We'll be coming back to that specifically in a future episode, but suffice it to say for now, we lost that political battle big time, and there's more work to do. Another cultural contagion that is in its infancy in terms of its popular awareness is gender ideology. And this is one we cannot sit back on. We need to engage now and not be afraid to have people call us names or whatever the pushback might be, because through gender ideology, we are seeing the destruction of our children. We are seeing the elimination of parental rights, and we're seeing the continued breaking up and fracturing of families. We have already seen where some states have used gender ideology to remove children from their homes because parents would not surrender or submit or acquiesce to the gender ideology agenda. This must be stopped now before it gets to a place like abortion is in our country. Here with me now to discuss this and much more is January Littlejohn. January, thanks for spending some time with us here on the program. How are you, and how are you feeling after the election overall?
It's great to be with you, Andrew. I think I echo a lot of people, how they're feeling today, which is just an enormous sense of relief and gratitude, honestly.
Amen. Amen. January, real quickly, I want you to just give our audience a little bit of your story, those who don't know you, and why you are so active in educating parents and grandparents how to protect their kids from gender ideology.
Sure. So I was just a normal stay-at-home mom prior to 2020. And at the height of COVID, our daughter came to us and told us she no longer felt like a girl. This propelled us into an issue that happened that fall at the school, where she, at the age of 13, was socially transitioned without our knowledge or consent. Since then, we filed a federal lawsuit against the school district. It was dismissed in December of 2022, and we have appealed the judge ruling at the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and we are awaiting the circuit's decision.
Now, how is your daughter now?
Thankfully, my daughter is now a senior in high school, and she is thriving, although we continue to heal from the aftermath of what the school did. Because when the schools interfere in these types of mental health situations and decisions, it creates a huge wedge in the parent-child relationship.
Well, one of the things that we mentioned earlier on the program that we are, now we're back on offense. I really see the election as we intercepted the ball. And after seeing the other side run the ball down the field time after time and score touchdowns and dance around us, and we didn't know, which way we were pointed. We finally got an interception. We got the ball back. Let's get back on offense. Let's talk about how we can be on offense when it comes to gender ideology. You recently gave a talk about how to protect children from gender ideology, and what I'd like to do is break that down for our audience here today in our next few minutes. So let's start with the 30,000-foot view. What is gender ideology?
It's such a great question because unfortunately, as a part of this election, even those words were weaponized and people were being led to believe that this wasn't a problem, that this was a quote unquote right-wing talking point. And this issue is very personal to a lot of families. It is not a political issue. It is a biblical issue. And so gender ideology in a nutshell is where children are being indoctrinated into a false belief system, and they're being taught a theory that was popularized by Dr. John Money back in the 50s. And he believed that we have a so-called gender identity that is completely separate from our sex. And so children are being led to believe that they have so-called gender identity. It's an internal feeling, is what they're told, of their gender, and that they choose to be a boy, girl, neither or both. And so we're seeing these made-up gender identities in the form of non-binary, gender fluid, demi-boy, demi-girl. If you Google it, there's over 72 different identities that are being directly marketed to children, oftentimes with their own pride flags and colors. And then, of course, you have a situation where they're being told you pick your pronouns. And there's all types of neo-pronouns that have been thrown into the mix. And it's creating chaos and confusion in our children where no previous confusion existed.
In your experience, why do you think so many of our kids are falling victim to this ideology? What is it that attracts them, that confuses them enough to enter into this kind of mindset and lifestyle, if you will?
Well, there's a lot going on there, Andrew, and it really depends on the state. So we have different states in our country that have different laws about when and how gender ideology should be taught. So for instance, in states out west, this theory is actually embedded into every subject starting in pre-K. And when you think about the minds of a 4- and 5-year-old, they are very impressionable. And so children look to the adults in their life to help them make sense of the world. And so when we're talking about very young children in that capacity, these are children that believe in the tooth fairy. They believe in Santa Claus. So of course, if an adult that they trust is telling them that they have an internal sense of their gender and they should explore it and pick it, they're going to believe that lie. Now, what we're seeing in most states are young, impressionable, vulnerable, predominantly girls at the height of puberty, when we're already feeling discomfort about our body, being exposed to this false belief system in a variety of ways. Sometimes it's in the schools through gay straight alliance clubs or gender sexuality clubs. It's also being taught through social emotional learning programs. And even our sex ed curriculums are oftentimes teaching this false belief system. It's rampant on social media platforms. There are trans influencers out there that are indoctrinating children into this false belief system. So it's really a perfect storm of children being exposed to this in many different ways. I mean, we have also seen where this ideology has even infiltrated some churches. Churches have been splitting over this issue. So we have a variety of ways in which children are being exposed to this. But when it comes to the teen population, the real social contagion that we're seeing, it's predominantly teen girls around 12, 13, 14 years old. And these girls are the awkward girls. These are girls that have difficulty fitting in. They may already have co-occurring psychiatric issues. And many of them, up to 40%, are on the autism spectrum.
Wow. I want to spend a couple of minutes and look at this biblically. And you've mentioned in some of our past conversations the theology behind gender ideology. Can you explain a little bit of that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many great books out there if you really want to dig deep into it. For the Body by Timothy Tennant is an excellent one. When Harry Became Sally by Ryan Anderson is great. And if you want to see the genesis of how this got into our schools, I highly recommend Queering of the American Child by Logan Lansing and James Lindsay. But essentially, it's just where I say it started. Dr. John Moody, who was actually a pedophile, he had a theory that gender was like more of a nurture, not nature. And so if you look back at what happened, there were twin boys that he decided to experiment on, one of which had a botched circumcision. And so John Money told the parents to raise that child, even though he was a boy, as a girl. His theory was, if you tell that child that he is a girl, you raise him as a girl, that he will adapt and behave like a girl. Well, this did not happen. He also saw these boys every year for a checkup and placed these boys in sexual positions and took photos of them according to these men. This story ends tragically, where one of the men overdosed and one killed himself. And so we're talking, when we talk about the true root of where this transgenderism came from, it is a very, very dark history. And I encourage you to look that up and see exactly how dark it is. And there are people that have tried to erase what happened, with John Money and these twin boys, and erase the horror of how this all began. And they've done a pretty good job of it, but the history is still out there, and I encourage people to look it up.
Wow. You mentioned that even some churches have begun to embrace this. And of course, a few of us, have seen the viral videos of, trans men pretending to be women, talking about how God is trans and all this stuff. And it would seem like an obvious answer, but clearly it's infecting to some degree with an amount of effectiveness. Why is the gender ideology so harmful and antithetical to biblical teaching?
Well, you don't need to go further than the book of Genesis to see why it's harmful. The book of Genesis says that God created man in his image, male or female. And that is the truth. That is reality. And so when you're teaching a child that they could be born in the wrong body, that is antithetical to biblical teachings. That goes against what God's design is for our body. And when you start to really look at where this ideology leads this child, which the social transition happening in the schools, that's not a benign intervention, because it's the first step toward medical intervention. And when you pull back the curtain of what these medical interventions are under the guise of healthcare, you quickly realize that these children, these vulnerable children, are being experimented on in real time using off-label puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and even surgeries. We know for a fact that double mastectomies have been occurring on girls as young as 12 years old in our country. In fact, there's a new database from an organization called Do No Harm. I'm here in my personal capacity today, but I am a senior fellow there. And they have come out with the stoptheharmdatabase.com, where we have definitive proof now that they are absolutely giving these drugs to children, and 5,747 child sex surgeries occurred between 2019 and 2023. And if you recall, even 2 years ago, trans activists were canceling people for even saying that surgeries were happening on minors. And we knew that they were lying, and now we have the proof to show the world.
When you think about it, it's really, you mentioned Genesis 3. I've gone back to that chapter quite a bit on this program, trying to illustrate that very point. But the lie that our kids are believing is really the same lie that Satan said to Eve. Did God really say that? Did God really create you that way? Is that really true? Just that seed of doubt. And it creates so much destruction, just as it did in Genesis chapter 3.
Yeah. And I'd like to add there, Andrew, is that this ideology, it really, for these kids, it encourages them to disassociate from their own bodies. And it tells these children that their mind and body is disconnected. We know from biblical teachings that that is not true. We are one body and mind together that God created, and he doesn't make mistakes in that way. If we have, birth abnormalities, that's something that's gone wrong in nature. We are not born in the wrong body. There's no evidence of that. And it's all antithetical to what God has planned for us.
A couple more questions for you here. First, on the practical, the social, maybe even the political side. I mentioned, we lost a lot of ground, and it looks like we've lost quite a bit politically with abortion, while we haven't necessarily lost, obviously, spiritually. These are God issues. These are issues of life, issues of creation. They're not political anyway. But how do we protect our children and grandchildren? Because this is not a battle that's going to go away anytime soon, even with the new administration.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm grateful that this administration, Trump and JD Vance, do seem to understand what's happening. They understand that these drugs are unregulated experiments being performed on children that very likely lead to the sterilization and loss of sexual functioning for these children. But we have got to get churches engaged on this issue. The churches used to be the foundation of a community. And that is why myself, my attorneys, and a pastor that specializes in sexual brokenness, we wrote this guide called the Church Transgender Response Guide. You can find it at childparentrights.org. And it's a guide that's almost 100 pages long. And it really equips pastors and parents with what is gender ideology? How is it being taught? Why is it harmful? Where does it lead? What can we do to protect our children and safeguard their hearts and minds? And the bottom line is, Andrew, our children need to be told the truth. They need to hear it frequently. They need to hear it at home, and they need to hear pastors preaching it from the pulpit, both in big church, is what we call our adult church, but also in our youth services, in our children's ministry. It is very clear that the Bible says that we are made in God's image, male or female, but the kids need to know the lie of transgenderism, that can never change, that regardless of what someone does to the physical traits of their body, what clothes they wear, how they wear their hair, that does not change who God created them to be.
So far with, I'm just hitting my mic there. So far with a lot of the social contagions, we can go back to things like gay marriage. I've mentioned abortion a couple of times. Now we're looking at gender ideology. The church in general, not specifically, there are some good churches, and I don't want to say there's no good going on, but in general, we as believers, we accepted the lie that we don't want to talk about that because we'll offend them, or we don't want to lose our 501c3, or we don't want to get sued. We accepted all these things. And by not talking about it from the pulpit, by not talking about it in our youth groups and small groups, by the church not being engaged, I really think that's where we lost ground on all of those battles. And here we are with gender ideology. Do you have, what gives you a reason for optimism that maybe this will be the social contagion where the church might actually stand up this time?
Well, they have to. If the church is not willing to stand in the gap to protect and safeguard the innocence and the body integrity of God's design for our children, what hope do we have? And let me be clear. I believe church is for everyone. Jesus is for everyone. Everyone should be welcome in church to hear God's good news. But we should not be lying to our children or promoting and telling them that you can confirm a lie. You can affirm a lie in a friend. And so this guide also goes through, what do you do if you have a classmate that's trans-identified? Because one thing that's really important to understand, Andrew, is that even if your child is not particularly vulnerable to believing that they are born in the wrong body, they are being taught to be an ally. And what that means is they are being indoctrinated into the same belief system and being told that the only way to be kind and show compassion is to affirm someone in their self-chosen identity. And so that's the part that has really infiltrated our churches, is because we're scared to offend someone, or that they may leave our church. But let me tell you something. A detransitioner, and if you don't know what a detransitioner is, it's someone who has gone through the medical procedures, has come to understand that did not fix their internal distress. It was a lie. And so they have gone back to identify as their natal sex. But a detransitioner by the name of Laura Beth Perry once said, when you get tired of living the lie, you don't turn to those who were lying to you. You go to those who were willing to tell you the truth, no matter how hard it was. And if you look at detransitioners, like even Walt Heyer, who when he found Jesus, he was still living as a woman. And that pastor, God bless him, that mentored to him, he did not affirm Walt as the woman he was living as, but he said, I'm glad you're here. I want you to be here. I will do my best to understand this. That is not the same as affirmation. And what you hope to do, because we know that Jesus saves. And the more that they read scripture and you expose them to God's word, they will and can come to the truth.
January Littlejohn, before we go, you mentioned several different websites. I know you mentioned several books you recommended. Maybe a couple places people can go to find out more information. That would be the best places for them to go.
Sure. So the guide that I mentioned is available at childparentrights.org. We also are offering trainings to churches. So if you're concerned about this issue, not just for the safety of your congregation and wanting to protect the children in your congregation from the lies of gender ideology, but maybe you're concerned about what are my legal rights? Is this legal? Because let me tell you, parents like me, when this was happening to our family, we feel abandoned by the church. And the church needs to become a safe haven for parents like me to bring my child and know that my daughter, even though she's experiencing confusion, will only be affirmed in the identity that Christ made her to be. And like I said, if you give these children time, like we did with our daughter, the vast majority of them are going to desist. They are going to resolve that distress, because the core issue of this distress is not gender. It is not their sex. It is trauma. It is anxiety. It is lack of fitting in and acceptance. It is autism. It's always something else. It is not gender. And so the churches need to understand this. They need to step up, be willing to tell the truth, and walk alongside these confused children, confused adolescents, and parents who are scared to death that their child may be put on this medical pathway, either as a child, because like you said, CPS is now taking children away from parents who don't want to affirm their child in this lie, or as a young adult. And we see that happening more and more, where young adults will find this ideology as they're vulnerable, their first time away at the university. Universities are rampant with this ideology. And then they have immediate access to these interventions. You can go into Planned Parenthood and get a prescription for testosterone or estrogen on your first visit. And so parents have got to understand there is no safeguarding when it comes to this issue when your child turns 18. And churches need to understand this too. We have a limited time to instill God's truth into our children so that when they go out and they hear the lies, they're exposed to the lies, they know that this is a lie. It's not biblical, and it's not kind to tell someone that they were born wrong.
January Littlejohn, thank you for your time today. We also thank you all for joining us on this episode of Culture Crossroads. Remember, you can email the show directly, sodomediaco@gmail.com. That is SODO mediaco@gmail.com. You can also find, I was going to say back episodes. What I meant was archived episodes. Way to close the show, Andrew. Land the plane into a mountain. Archived episodes on the Beck News TV app, as well as sodomediaproductions.com. Easy for me to say. sodomediaproductions.com. That is SODO mediaproductions.com. For all of our guests today, I am Andrew Southwick. Once again, thank you for being with us. Remember, it's the truth that sets you free, and the truth will keep you free. Until next time, so long. John 1:5.
I am an 8-time world champion, 15-time national champion, and current American record holder in the 3,000 meter indoor. With Stewart's, it has been so amazing because it's an anti-inflammatory, it increases blood flow, and Stewart's is all natural. It doesn't have any stickiness, it doesn't have any smell, and I can use it at any time. It's simple, it just works.
Order today at stewartsnatural.health. Use code April10 for a discount. stewartsnatural.health.